Pope Francis was very interested in finding ways to address the war in Ukraine. I think there are two levels to his pontificate. First is the public statements and actions, and the second one is something that has been done and we learned only post factum. So publicly, he was very outspoken about Ukraine, which is, I think, slightly unusual. During the first year of the war, he made around 100 statements. So it almost, more than one statement per week, which is a lot. His predecessors never commented on any specific war or military conflict as often as he did. So he really took it very seriously and would condemn the war, would call for peace constantly. He provided some financial help toward Ukraine, which started already before the full-scale invasion. He went to the Russian embassy on the day of when the invasion started, which is also very unusual, not part of what the popes do. He wrote a nice letter to the Ukrainians expressing his solidarity. So there was a lot of talking about Ukraine and calls for peace. He also proposed the Holy See as a place for negotiations, or expressed interest in mediating himself or with the diplomatic staff of the Holy See. This wasn't, I think, very well accepted for all sorts of reasons. Perhaps we can return to that later. But there was this will to do something about the war in Ukraine. Two successful stories are, I think, his interventions to free some of Ukrainian prisoners of war, in particular those from Azov battalion, and the system they launched to verify the identity of Ukrainian children that have been kidnapped or moved to Russia. So Cardinal Zuppi, who was and still is Archbishop of Bologna, was sent on a mission to Ukraine, then to Russia. He also went to the US, where he met with President Biden, and to Beijing, where he met some of the foreign office officials in China. And this was a humanitarian mission, and I think the key focus was the return of Ukrainian children. Now, Pope Francis has been also very criticized, both by Russians and by Ukrainians. A lot of his statements were considered to be ambiguous. Ukrainians didn't like, for example, him speaking about the need to raise the white flag. They didn't like Francis inviting both Ukrainians and Russians to carry the cross on Via Crucis procession in Rome. They didn't like Pope Francis speaking about NATO barking at Russia's doors as provoking the war. So there are certain things that Ukrainians didn't like about Francis and expressed sharp criticism, and not only in public opinion or by governmental officials, but also by the Catholic bishops in Ukraine. Russians also didn't like certain Francis's expressions. So for me, those little, mistakes or miscalculations are due to the fact that Francis liked to be very direct when talking to media. A lot of his decisions were taken without consulting the Vatican's diplomatic staff, the Secretariat of Staff. He would speak meeting his Jesuit brothers, for example, over a coffee, and then all the transcript of that conversation would be published. So I think that the most ambiguous statements by Francis were made when he was speaking unprepared. And what we see with Leo, and we can return to this later, is that Pope Leo tries to approach the issue slightly in a different way. Yes, he reads his statements from a piece of paper that has been prepared beforehand. I think there is a lot of continuity in Pope Leo's approach to the Russo-Ukrainian war, but also a couple of elements of novelty, of difference with Francis. Perhaps it's a bit too early to say what is his approach towards this war because it has been so early in the pontificate. So we have only a couple of signs, and I will try to interpret them as I to see the meaning that I think we can dig out from that. So on the one hand, there is a huge continuity with Francis in terms of attention towards Ukraine. The Holy See for decades has been involved in various peace processes. And I think every pope considers service to humanity, service to peace as a part of his mission. Under Pope Francis, the term that was used to describe Holy See's interest in peacemaking as positive neutrality. So the Holy See would be neutral, will not side with a party of conflict, but at the same time will be positively interested in mediating, in bringing peace. So I think that we see a huge continuity. And the same with attention towards Ukraine. Pope Francis has commented Ukraine very often, and so does Pope Leo. Now, what are, I think, the particularities of Pope Leo's approach, which already have appeared over last weeks? First, when he spoke from St. Peter's balcony just after his election, his first words were peace, yes, peace be with you. So there is this constant emphasis on peace. He repeated the word peace 5 or 6 times during his first address. He spoke about peace to in his audience to the diplomatic corps. In his address on Sunday after his first Regina Coeli prayer, he asked for children to be returned to their families. He spoke of the peace in Ukraine that needs to be authentic, just, and lasting. So it's also a terminology that Ukrainian government often use to insist that not any peace is okay for Ukraine. Ukraine needs an authentic and just peace. Then there has been this video circulating of Bishop Prevost, when Prevost was the bishop of a Peruvian diocese, where he commented on the war in Ukraine. And in that video, he condemned Russian imperialism. He spoke about crimes against humanity committed in Ukraine. And he also criticized the leaders of the global South for not clearly enough condemning Russian aggression. And I think perhaps Pope Leo will not be speaking with the same terminology as he did when he was a bishop. However, we see that this approach is very different from that of Francis, yes, who often imagined himself as being the voice from the global South, but he also spoke about the war the war between two imperialisms, Russian and Western, and who I think approached the war like many leaders of the global South. So this might be a point of difference between Leo and Francis. Finally, Pope Leo was interested in doing something, I think, more specific about Ukraine. he had the conversation, a phone conversation with Zelensky very soon after his election. And the Ukrainian ambassador to the Holy See, Mr. Jurash, said that it was the first call with the foreign head of state that Pope Leo has had. A few days ago, Pope Leo met with President Zelensky on his inauguration day. Cardinal Parolin said that Vatican would like to offer itself as a space for possible negotiations. So there are a lot of signs that are very concentrated, yes, in those first 2 weeks of Leo's pontificate, which indicate that the issue of Ukraine will be among the top issues on papal agenda. We'll need to see how this develops. There are certainly many things that we don't know that are happening. The Vatican isn't very public about what it is doing. I think this is one of the key features of the Holy See's diplomacy, to be very discreet, not to announce what they are doing. And I think this is something that is usually appreciated by the different parties, that the Holy See can do its mediation without too much publicity and without taking too much credit for what they are doing. I believe that the mediation in Pope Francis's time, the calls, the offers to mediate, were not very successful because the parties were not really ready to have a dialogue, to negotiate. So the situation has changed, and I think this gives more chance to the Holy See to play a certain role. Around a decade ago, we've seen the Holy See being very successful in mediating the conflict between USA and Cuba, which finally led to the reinstallment of the diplomatic relations between two countries. One of the reasons why Vatican managed to serve as an effective mediator is that it had good relations with both countries. It had its own people in the US, where you have a lot of Catholic congressmen, people in government. Cuba, the Catholic Church in Cuba also has developed a working relationship with their government, and there were many contacts already since the visit of Pope John Paul II to Cuba. So there were a good relationship with both countries, and the Vatican was perceived as a party that really doesn't have any specific interests, no economic interests, no political interests in the outcomes of those negotiations. So when we look now at Ukraine and Russia, I think we need to acknowledge that while the first point remains the same, the first point is very different. The Vatican doesn't have so many contacts with Ukrainian political or cultural elites, nor they have contacts, so many contacts with Russia, although the relationship between the Holy See and the Russian Orthodox Church have improved before the full-scale invasion, and there was this famous meeting between Pope Francis and Patriarch Kirill in Cuba. However, the contacts are not as extensive as it was the case with Cuba and the USA. And I think it's a weakness. It might be a sign that Holy See will be in much difficult position in really contributing something to negotiations. On the other hand, what remains the same is the fact that the Holy See is really a disinterested partner. it's not a member of NATO, unlike Turkey. Yes, it has no economic interests like the USA or Gulf countries. So if Russia and Ukraine would be looking for a place that can very respectfully and in a very disinterested way to help them, I think the Holy See can be used for this purpose. I was thinking a lot about this meeting between President Zelensky and President Trump at Pope Francis's funeral, which, according to media, was really very important and contributed to improve the relations between the White House and Ukraine after that horrible meeting in the Oval Office. And I think one of the moments that made this meeting successful was the place. Yes, was this the moment of solemnity during the Pope's funeral inside the Vatican. So it's not really a place that invites you to be cynical, that invites you, yes, to play games, to humiliate your partner. So I think the place itself conduces, I think, to approach negotiations more seriously. And I think the Holy See can build on this. Now, it needs to be seen what Pope Leo can contribute to all those negotiations. He doesn't have a career in diplomacy. Perhaps one of the reasons he prefers to read carefully prepared statements which mention Ukraine and this war rather than speaking from his own mind is that he is conscious that he lacks this diplomatic experience. But Cardinal Parolin remains there. Cardinal Zuppi is around. So the Holy See has people who are capable of advising the Pope. And now we need to see whether the parties, Ukraine and Russia, but also USA, that is very important for all those negotiations, whether they will be interested in using the Holy See. But even if negotiations will not happen in the Vatican's territory, I think that the Holy See can keep contributing in a way it has been over those past 3 years by helping to negotiate the release of POWs, by helping to bring Ukrainian children back to Ukraine, by, I think, reminding the world that this war is happening. And I think that the position of the Holy See and of the Pope is very important not only in the Western world, but also in the global South. Pope Leo spent a lot of time in Latin America. So I think his reminders, him constantly speaking about Ukraine, is also helping the countries in the global South to be constantly reminded that this war is happening and that Ukrainian people needs world solidarity and assistance in this war.